So people are shocked at the size of the market. So when I talk about wine fraud, I don't just talk about counterfeits, because you have to talk about fraud. So you have to talk about, the resale of stolen wine, the resale of wine that has been through hurricanes and fires. So resale of South wines, bootleg spirits. But to give you some perspective, the World Health Organization states that 25% of all alcohol consumed in the world is illicit.
Wow. Talking about the spirits, fake Pappy Van Winkle. That's phenomenal.
It is phenomenal.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today, about to have a conversation with Maureen Downey up in the Los Altos Hills. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available iHeartRadio, Pandora, etc., wherever you hang out for podcasting. We're here to have a conversation with Maureen Downey, the preeminent authority and consultant on fake wine. Yes, there is such a thing. Some people think I sold fake wine. No, I'm just joking. But welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We had a little trouble connecting, but that's great. I'm glad you're here. I would next time we're up in that area, we're going to stop by and say hi and taste some wine and continue this. Because like your friend,
I think we have a glass in hand, right?
It is, and I started this thing because I hate the swirling and sniffing shows. I think that propagates the aristocracy of wine, and that has nothing to do with it. We enjoy doing it and pontificating, but most people don't understand what we're talking about. So I like to tell the stories. But these are, I think, what you've been doing. There's incredible stories. But before we get to that, I want to continue this conversation since listeners heard your Master of Wine story. I had applied on the airplane. I told Nova this. I was flying home from New York, and I said, "Hey, do you want to be a Master of Wine?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not? I can do that." And I applied online, and and I did actually. The essay was good. They liked my essay, but they hated my tasting notes. But there's a whole sort of understanding of what the Master of Wine wants from you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not a free form, do it your own way. And it's interesting, especially I think as an American. So I was in the program for many years. I did very well on the tasting. I never got that great on the essays. But I focused on the tasting. I wanted to pass that first. And I'm a very good natural taster. I actually took the advanced master sommelier degree at 23, or the advanced master sommelier exam at 23. And Fred Dame said I was one of the best natural tasters he had ever seen. And he moved me to New York in 1996. And that's how this mindful journey started. So I'm a good natural taster. But, tasting wine is a language. And it's just like learning any other language. I can't go to Russia and talk about that blue car over there with the flat tire because I would speak Russian. I can see it. We can all see it. But if you're not using the same terminology and the same, sentence format and all of that, then somebody isn't going to understand you. So I think, following the WSET and then the MW or the Master Sommelier programs, they really they bring you along so that you're speaking the same language that other professionals speak.
The interesting thought you made of that, and it's not why we're here together, because I want to talk about fraud in the wine business, but it's an important concept for listeners to understand, the industry of the Master Somm and the Master of Wine and the Diploma WSET. But you said something before we started the show, and that was there are a lot of masters of wine that, I'm not going to say don't do anything, but they don't ever have a preeminence in the industry. And it's an incredibly difficult degree to get or certification. But, and that's why I wonder, and this is why my comment when I started this conversation was sort of like, depending on why you're getting into it. Now, it's so arduous, you probably can't get into it without the complete passion and get through it, without the passion and the need to do it. But at the same time, when it's all said and done, it's what you do with it and the information you learn that matters.
Well, and for me, I think it's even a little bit, it's more than that. It's because I've read some articles recently that, you can get the knowledge someplace else. You don't have to take these courses. And I would strongly disagree with that, sentiment, because the value of going through these courses is not necessarily in in the education that you get, it's in the connections that you get. It's in the people that you meet. It's in the relationships that you can establish. And, for myself, for example, with all this fraud stuff, had people not known that I had been passionate about fraud and speaking out about it in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, when Rudy did get arrested in 2012, people wouldn't have known, oh my God, she was right. We need to talk to her. And I didn't know all these big producers in Bordeaux, and doors in Burgundy wouldn't open to me. So I think, being in the program and making the connections, and as you were just recently in Northern California, and you interviewed Nova Cadamatre, who's a master of wine, winemaker, consultant winemaker, and a dear friend of mine. I wouldn't have Nova as a great friend if it weren't for the MW program. So I'm very grateful that I did study that. Now, I had an opportunity to continue on the MW program, or deal with the fact that Rudy just got arrested, Rudy Pernille, on this counterfeiter, whom I had been saying for 10 years was counterfeiting. And I chose to build that instead of studying more. But, I think for a lot of people, they think that somehow getting the MW means they're going to suddenly just be overwhelmed with offers and money and opportunities. And that's not necessarily the case. And today, especially, there's this new class of people coming through who are coming from other professions. They're attorneys, they're this, and they want a new career. Wine seems to be, we get, and not on the MW side, but we seem to kind of be the dumpster for all other industries. Like people that either fail out of other industries or they get bored. They're like, oh, I want to do wine. Wine is fun. But it's actually a career and it's actually work, but they're a whole new, industry people who.
John Wilkinson of Bin to Bottle. If you've ever been interested in starting a brand, starting a winery, he's part incubator, part processor. For instance, the whole brand Prisoner started in his facility. Great conversation about the industry and the entrepreneur side of the industry. Also some great conversations about Armenian wines that we recorded a few months ago out in Armenia. So have listened to that.
And they have learned everything, but they don't have any background in wine. So I think that's really weird. Like you could pass the test with no experience. And I think that's still strange, but
it's very strange. And
yeah,
I'm the opposite, even though I, study a lot, read a lot of old books, and I have some fabulous time right now reading a book on Gertrude Stein and Hemingway's experience in Paris. And that has a lot to do with wine as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. I mean, some of these conversations I have on these shows with people that are educated in the wine industry, but they can't hold a conversation about what the wine industry is, because it's more than just fermented grape juice in a bottle. And maybe that's, in fact, my conversation with John Wilkinson at Bin to Bottle was nothing's really changed for 12,000 years on what's in the bottle. Maybe some technologies, but it's still fermented grape juice. But the business of wine is completely different. And difficult to manage. The reason I sold my company was it just got too complicated for the size of my company to manage, to be able to produce a profit from it. Even though we were selling 300,000 to 400,000 bottles of wine, I sold 20 million bottles of wine in my career. I mean,
yeah,
it just had to get too hard.
Well, one of the things that I find fascinating is that even the most successful winemakers are at their heart farmers.
That's what they are.
Right? Because the wine is made in the vineyard. And, so now I've got a blockchain technology that is anti-fraud, inventory control, track and trace. Try explaining that to white people. It's difficult.
Well, let's talk about that, because I had a podcast. I won't mention any names. It's an old friend of mine in the industry. We started in this industry in the 70s. And I reposted the podcast recently, and I got an email from a gentleman. I think he's in LA. He sells in rare wines for sellers, resells them for people that have them. And he was offended I reposted this podcast because he said this gentleman is known for his fraudulent wines, just counterfeit wines. I don't want to mention any names. It's just a fascinating subject. And when I brought it up over the last 2 weeks that you're going to be on the show to people, they're like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Oh, there's serious stuff." Now, either you knew who Rudy was, and that's obviously the most obvious story, but it's been going on a lot longer than that.
Pliny the Elder wrote about counterfeit wine in 70 AD.
Oh, well, that was really?
Yeah. His friends, he considered himself rather a connoisseur, and his friends were waxing and waning over a bottle of Filardia, which was the most popular wine at the time. And he was writing what idiots they were, basically, that they didn't know that what they were drinking wasn't real Filardia. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
70 AD. So it's not a new problem. It's not going away. It's getting worse. Currently, so people are shocked at the size of the market. So when I talk about wine fraud, I don't just talk about counterfeits, because you have to talk about fraud. So you have to talk about, the sale of the resale of stolen wine, the resale of wine that has been through hurricanes and fires. So resale of salvage wines, bootleg spirits. But to give you some perspective, the World Health Organization states that 25% of all alcohol consumed in the world is illicit.
25%.
20, that's the World Health Organization. So,
wow.
Yeah.
You're talking about just spirits, fake Pappy Van Winkle, fake.
Yep.
As well.
25%.
That's phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. But if you pay attention to the news, it's not. Because there are news stories twice or 3 times a week in the wine trade. 10,000 bottles seized here, 50,000 bottles seized there. And it's a combination of high end and lower end. I would invite listeners to Google the Sassicaia fraud and watch the Carabinieri, redo. So organized crime have gotten involved, and they're doing this at a grand scale.
Wow.
And they get digital printers and they recreate all the anti-fraud. They make the tissue paper. They make the wooden boxes. They make the bands that go around the wooden boxes. I mean, we got high-end stuff. There's another one that's Bordeaux bottling line in China. And there's a Bordeaux bottling line of a Bordeaux, it's not a major, it's a petit cru. But you see this, and it's a Chinese bottling line, and the bottles are perfect.
Wow.
Because they have the bottles.
They have a bottle manufacturing or bottling of the juice.
Yeah. We have no idea what's in it.
Yeah. So before Rudy, which for the listeners of the movie Sour Grapes and Rudy Kern, I always get his name on, but he's my neighbor. He was my neighbor here. We're in Arcadia. And I remember...
You weren't drinking them.
No. And it's just a fascinating story about... And I'm a huge fan of, for instance, the movie Catch Me If You Can and Frank Abagnale's story. And I love hearing his story because I don't know, maybe I have this romantic view of being able to do it to the extent of just to fool somebody, not to cheat anybody, but just to be able to fool. And a lot of people don't know that Walt Disney's career started in doing that. He was a fraudulent war relics vendor.
Really?
Yeah, he would make distressed war helmets and sell them as real. And build the spirit. So before Rudy became a movie in the story, were people aware of this? And were auction houses diligently seeking proper goods and not?
Well, no, and many of them are still not. So Rudy learned from a man named Hardy Rodenstock. So this is kind of fun. Hardy Rodenstock's real name was Meinhard Gorka. He was a German music producer turned counterfeiter, wine extraordinaire. So he started making old and rare wine in the 80s and is selling it. And the sad thing is that a lot of the benchmark tasting notes from maybe some of the biggest critics in the world were bottles that were made by Hardy Rodenstock.
Really?
And then Rudy Cornelian came along and he started making old and rare wine. The interesting thing is that Hardy is somewhat narrow. Hardy made, mostly Bordeaux, lots of Buchem, like all these, the oldest bottle of Buchem in the world. I took a bottle of Buchem back to Buchem, and Pierre Lurton was like, yeah. So this bottle was made a year after Marie Antoinette lost her head and a year before my house was built. And it totally wasn't real.
Yeah. Right.
But people paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. So Hardy Rothschild, I think, kind of influenced Rudy. And then in the wake of the Rudy Cornell, he was arrested in 2012. He was able to make and sell wine for about 10 years because he was funded by Acker Merrill Condit and John Capon. And these documents are available on winefraud.com, our website that's a resource for people, where you can actually see people giving Rudy $1 million loans through the auction house to come up with these wines.
Knowingly do that, or they thought Rudy was a rare and special guy who was able to source these things.
Well, if that's the case, why wouldn't you just buy $1 million worth of wine for Rudy? Why are you doing it through an auction house?
Don't know. That's a good question.
Right. It is. Because then you're going to go buy at auction and pay the 30% to the auction house. Why not just get $1 million worth of wine from Rudy? So none of it made sense. But so anyway, in the wake of Rudy getting arrested in 2012, I started saying that Rudy was counterfeiting in 2002. I was the only woman in the industry. I started in auctions in 2000. They only became legal in New York in 1996. And Christie's and Sotheby's started in 1998. And Morel and Company might have started in 98 as well.
What started in what?
Auctioning wine. It only became legal in 1996. The first auctions in New York were in 98.
What about Michael Broadbent and,
That's London.
Hugh Blind?
So that's London. Hugh Blind was in Boston. But in New York, they were not legal.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I started in 2000. So I was kind of at the very beginning of the industry. And I started to find, when you line bottles up and one of them looks different, I have a little bit of OCD and a bit of a photographic memory. So when things are slightly different, they stand out to me. I do wooden puzzles as a hobby, right? So like I'm a puzzle person and try to find patterns and things. So these things started to stick out, but there was really nobody to teach me about it. So I had to go and learn about glass from glass experts and paper from paper experts, and started to put all this stuff together kind of forensically, and learned about Hardy Rothschild. And so I started to say that Rudy was counterfeiting in 2002. He wasn't arrested until 2012, and that was a very lonely 10 years. And I'm not getting upset. Sorry, I just it sounded like I got choked up there. I didn't. So, and there are a lot of guys that really don't like me because it's big money.
Yeah.
So, I stuck to my guns, and I because I knew it was right. It's that little, Sister Catherine on this shoulder and Sister Angela on this shoulder saying, do what's right. So,
that's interesting. Stop there for a second, because in Francis Dickersfield's book about fraud and deceit and murder and all that in the wine business, she talks about that there wasn't really an awareness there was an awareness, but there was no interest in prosecution back in those days for alcohol and at the federal level.
There's still not.
It was the Koch brothers that sort of pressed the issue with Rudy and whatever else they did to bring it to the forefront. And she also mentions that, the prosecutor, isn't happy with himself when they prosecuted Joe Franzia for faking, white Zinfandel. And you're saying today that's still the case, that the feds don't have a keen interest in pursuing this because they're pursuing other stupid things, but whatever.
In the state of California, well, they're pursuing, yeah, exactly. They're going after bullshit and letting looters out. Right. In the state, in the state of California, wine is important enough to our GDP that we have an FBI agent. So I've been working with the FBI agent. We have a new one recently, out of the San Francisco office, works in Santa Rosa, and we have a home in Sonoma. So I do a lot of training and stuff up there. We've worked out a lot of cases. John Fox, put a couple of Josh Criminal, we put a bunch of people in jail. But one of the really frustrating things for us is that there is a pedophile who owns, he does shell companies, but who owns one of the biggest storage and transport companies in the United States of wine, not allowed to be in the wine industry as a convicted pedophile. And he was operating without a license. in California, in St. Louis, and maybe in Chicago and New Jersey. In the state of California, selling wine without a license is a misdemeanor. The FBI could not get the California ADC to go after this guy for illegally selling wine because it's a misdemeanor.
No, they don't care. Why do they care? But illegally selling wine without licenses, because there's lots of those guys around here.
Yeah. Yeah. Which means, the next time that you're pissed off that you hit a pothole, thank a counterfeiter because he's not paying the taxes that are due. This guy actually got arrested in St. Louis. They raided his office in St. Louis, arrested him, arrested his wife, and arrested his CFO. And he owed millions in back taxes to St. Louis. So that's
selling. He was selling wine. You said transporting wine.
And he sold wine. And he imports wine. And he was doing all the unlicensed. So what amazes me is that the only thing that the government goes after, and I actually spoke at the National Conference of State Liquor Authorities a few years ago. The only thing they care about is shipping regulations, because the money is all of the money is the lobbying money. So they don't actually care about the law. It's just the distributors who care about keeping the distribution dollars.
It's the WSWA.
Yeah, it's so frustrating to me and so what I said to these guys is, look, California, I know you're out there, go after all of these people who are illegally selling wine because they're shipping it. I mean, if you care so much about shipping to minors, go after the people who are totally breaking the law, not the winery that just wants to get wine to their client in state XYZ. So yeah, it's frustrating to me.
Well, we've been dealing with this forever. Wrapping this company up here, my wife had to shut down 32 different tax returns to different states. And as you already know, some states charge the tax by the gallon, some by the liter, some by the bottle. And it's just ridiculous to try and calculate. And just the effort to say, hey, we're not doing it anymore, has become a nightmare for her to figure out. But she's a licensed CPA and she wants to do it right. It's funny you say that because I stood here for 35 years every Tuesday tasting wine, and I had every conceivable type of vendor in the store, right?
Yeah.
Winery reps, I had supplier reps, I had Southern in here, and of course all the big guys and all the bottom fishers. And now that you bring it up, I know of a couple bottom fishers that were not licensed to sell me wine. And one of them actually went off and got a tasting room so that he would be licensed. I thought that was rather noble of him to actually, prepare to pay the taxes.
Yeah.
But then this building I'm in right now is licensed as an 02, as a 9, as a 12, as 17, 18, and 20. And I'm trying to market the building with the licenses. And one guy came to me and goes, hey, I may have a guy. He's been selling Bordeaux for years, black market. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, he's got a list of clients. He's selling all the classified growths and the Grand Cru Burgundies, and maybe he wants a license. And I'm thinking to myself, how annoying. It's
right. And here's your wife doing 32 tax returns, right?
Exactly.
So that's what so that is one of the things that I've figured out about fraud. One of the things about wine fraud, if we're going to tackle this problem, what we need is oversight through the supply chain. Because the wine market is so opaque and there's so much gray market and black market, then that's how fraud gets in. So, over the last 20 years, everybody that's had an idea about, their anti-fraud solution has sent it to me. So I've gotten to do a lot of good market research, and poked holes in it. And I finally figured out that, you can't just put a sticker on a bottle and think that you're safe. What you have to do, the producer has to be able to watch that bottle as it moves through the supply chain, as does the distributor, so that we can eliminate some of this gray market, activity. And I know that I'm not going to be popular with the gray market, and I'm totally fine with that. Because if I provide transparency to the producer and to the consumer, those are the two parties that I care about. All the guys making so much money in the middle because they worked as a sommelier for 2 years and happen to know a couple rich guys who are selling their wine, Like, they shouldn't be making all the money. You know, the producers should be able to be making the money, the licensed wholesalers and distributors, and then the consumers should know what they're getting. I mean, one of the problems with the John Fox problem at Premier Cru, that's one of the cases that I worked on with the FBI. John Fox, even back when I was at Morel & Company in 2000, John Fox would put bids in at the auction, and he would send out emails as though he already had those bottles in hand. The auction hadn't even happened yet.
Wow.
So I knew that guy was dirty. And then he sent in wine when I was at Zacky's, and half of it was counterfeit. So I knew that guy was dirty. And then by the time I moved back to California in 2004, and, was a part of a group called the Bordeaux Wine Enthusiasts, and we get together and have dinners. And so I got to know the people in this group in person really well. And a bunch of them had wine. They're like, yeah, I've got wine, I bought futures 5 years ago and they're not here yet. And I'm like, yeah, you're not getting futures. I mean, the reason that you give somebody money for futures is so that you have assured provenance, right? Well, John Fox is out there on the secondary market buying the wine. That's not what you paid for. Yeah. So if we can provide oversight through the supply chain so that the guy who buys futures actually gets, wine of good provenance, then we've solved part of the problem, I think.
It's interesting because I sold wine that was $10 to $20. My great collection of Grand Cru Burgundies and classified growths here, but I had clients over the years who asked for those wines, and I would get them prices, and they would go, I can get it cheaper. And I kept telling them, but you don't understand. This is from the sort of, like, for instance, if somebody wanted Lafite, it would come from the family. That direct connection with the organization, with the, I forgot the name of the family now, but, or there's a vendor here who all his wines in cellar are directly from the winery.
Right.
Yeah, you can go find the stuff cheaper, but man, now that you're exposing how prevalent it is, I didn't realize it was as big. Right.
So I think about five. My number is 5. Michael Egan number is 10% of fine wine is counterfeit. A lot of it happens at the lower end. So here is the Shea Vault is the name of my solution. Shea Consulting is the name of my company. Shea is French for seller. So the Shea Vault is a Web3 solution that we can implement either at the producer or in the secondary market with one of our authenticators, who we now have all over the world. And what it does is we put the information in, a blockchain ledger is created. So now you go on Wine Searcher and you see that there are 10 bottles of this Lafite, 82 Lafite listed. Well, the vendors who have Shea Vault bottles, unless they're vendors on my blacklist and they're not allowed to use my system, like Agar, there'll be a little URL. And a potential buyer can go on and they can click on that URL. They can see the blockchain secured ledger of not only authenticity, but provenance, because it'll show you, if you go on sheavault.com, you can see one of these ledgers. It'll show you, that the bottle was purchased from, Chateau and Estates by Fred Dame or by Name Confidential on this date. It was sold at Zacky's auction on this date, this lot, purchased by Maureen Downey. Now, Maureen Downey is selling it through K&L, on this date. And then if the person buys the bottle, the ledger gets transferred to them so that we have this ledger. Now, on Wine Searcher, if you have 10 bottles and 4 of them are in the Shea Vault and 6 of them are not, the 4 that are vaulted are going to be worth more because the authenticity and provenance. So in that way, hey, if you want to gamble and you want to bottom fish, go for it. But what I always say is that if you're spending, $3,000 on a $5,000 bottle, you have not saved $2,000. You have probably wasted $3,000. Because if you're getting a screaming deal, it's salvage, it's illicit. Yeah. So pay for and there will be a stratification of the market. The people that want to pay, my clients pay for provenance. I tell them, because I manage collections, I find offers, and I tell them, if you want the cheapest wine, I'm not your girl.
Right.
because I'm not going to go for the cheapest. I'm going to go for top problems.
So let's talk about, I want to get into the blockchain stuff in a second here, but I want to peel back some of the things I saw come across my desk over the years that you can probably poke holes in. For instance, these 3D stickers, what do they call them, for holograms, that they were putting on wines. I was just trying to figure out, I had one of my vendors actually who was selling Chilean wines here, was like, oh, I became the rep for this thing, and here's my brochure. And I'm like, I still don't get it. That seems just as fakeable.
Well, number one, it substantiates a counterfeit refill, because you could easily empty that bottle and refill it, and that with a needle. So if you've got
didn't have that, right?
You've got everybody uses Corbin now.
Yeah.
So and there was a situation in Europe where there was this huge international ring of hospitality workers who were putting their Corbin and empty fine wine bottles in with the laundry, and then taking the laundry out, and somebody would come around and collect the bottles, and they sold thousands of bottles and on online auctions of refilled, wine. So I consider that a cosmetic solution. That's also something, and I've spoken with some producers who use it. Somebody could recreate that bubble tag. By the way, 5% of those tags get scanned. 5%. And if you are close enough to go like this, it's too late. You already own that.
You're already on the bottle. Yeah.
Right?
That's a good value.
Not investment. So anything where you have to be in proximity to the bottle, in my world, is not a solution. Anything that is cosmetic is not a solution. Somebody in China, if they can recreate an entire bottle, they can 3D print those bubble tags and make 1 million, Lafon Montrachets. And okay, 5% of people will ever scan those things. Maybe they'll get caught, but they won't get caught until they sell a couple thousand bottles, right? So I don't find that to be a robust solution. It does not address the supply chain. It doesn't give the buyer any protection prior to purchase, and it doesn't help the producer know who's drinking their wine.
No, I couldn't understand it, because I said, I don't know, this seems easily a thing, but I love this. I did not love it. Probably should hate it. But the idea that you could Corvette a thing, pour it out and refill it with whatever. And I went to a tasting today, a very high-end tasting. It was all grange. It was vertical. We were supposed to guess what it was and where it was and all those things. And it was clear to me, this is interesting, so I want to ask you this question. This was, I think, the earliest vintage was like an 89 or 87 and up to like 2015. And some random vintages in between, 7 different wines. The question amongst this group of aficionados who had these incredible cellars was, is this a vertical? And then, what do you think it is? And my experience taught me this was clearly a vertical. And this is kind of interesting, because if any of these wines were faked, there would have been some kind of anomaly in the sequence of wines. And it was clear to me when I was tasting them that these were the same winemaker from the same plots of land in the same general vicinity, and that the terroir differences were the only thing I was sensing.
Yeah.
So the winemaking expertise was obvious. But I'm wondering, if somebody buys a fake Lafite, have you ever heard of somebody saying, man, I opened this wine, it just didn't taste right?
Of course. So there's, and go back and read John Capon's horrific tasting notes. I mean, those are littered with counterfeit wines. And if there's one of three things that happen. Number one, the counterfeiter intentionally puts tainted wine in. So corked wine.
Oh.
Use a little bit of cork, and then, oh, bummer, it's corked, right?
Add one bottle.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of times people chalk it up to a bad bottle. So that's why when I started at auctions, this really it was exposed, because before auctions were big in New York, people would have a case of Petrus, and they'd go down and they'd have a bottle. And they would be like, oh my God, that's amazing. The angels are singing. And then 6 months later, they'd have another one, and they'd be like, hey, that's just not so good. Must be a bad bottle, right? And then they'd open another one and it would be great. Well, what we noticed, especially bottles coming from Royal Wine Company, was if you took 12 out, 4 of them were counterfeit. But collectors weren't taking them out and inspecting them. And, maybe they take them out and rack them, but a lot of people just left them in the case. So what royal wine merchants would do and what other people did, and there's a particular guy in LA that did quite a lot of this back in the day. I think, anyway, they would take a full case. They would take, 4 cases and turn it into 6 cases or 8 cases.
Well, the margins suck in wine generally. So, hey, this is a great way to pad your margins.
Right. So it wasn't until we started putting these bottles up next to each other, it would be like, okay, these 3 or these 4 don't fit. Now, when it comes to the taste, what the old and rare wine, one of the ridiculous things about the John Capon tasting notes was that he'd be like, yeah, we tasted another mag of 1950 Lafleur from Big Boy's cellar, tasted 4th time this month, consecutive notes. Yeah, they didn't make that many mags. And by the way, I'm selling a bunch in my auction next week, so it'll be great. It was totally a pitch to sell these counterfeit wines. But a lot of times the wines would be off. Now, what we did the other night, there's a counterfeiter from Russia named Alexander Ayubov, or he called himself Alex Ankin. And he got caught, and he was counterfeiting Romane Conti. And the packaging is brilliant. I mean, it is so good.
Really?
But he was caught. I have a bunch of his counterfeit bottles. And I've hired Ronan Saber, who's a master sommelier. He's the CEO of the European Core Master Sommeliers, as the CEO for Shea Balls. And we were up in Napa, and he was like, come on, let's open this. And I had some winery friends and winemakers over, and I was like, all right, fine. Like, you guys, you can open it, but it sucks. And so we opened up an 04 Romane Conti, and everybody was like, this is disgusting. So this guy was making them, organized crime, making them in Russia, selling them in Switzerland, as 4 or 6 at a time out of his car, or, selling them to different people who would sell them to different people. But they're so expensive, you don't need to have a strong supply chain. You can pepper it up, and still make tons of money. So I think one of the things that Rudy did, which made him different, was that he actually tried to make decent blends.
Yeah.
But at the same time, let's go back to the John Capon tasting notes. 1950 Lafleur out of mag, tasted consecutively 4 times. They made 6 mags the entire year. And he drank more than those, and he wrote tasting notes on more than those, I believe. Or we definitely sold more than those. But how many people have really had that wine enough times to say, oh yeah, that's correct?
And you don't open mags very often, so that could constantly cellar, right?
A 1945 Mouton that has lived this life. You take a bunch of 1945 Mouton that have actually lived in the same box since 1947 when they were put in a box. They're all going to be so different. They're like people. Right. Now that they're 60 years old, 60-year-old triplets are not as similar as 60-year-old as those triplets are when they're 4 days old.
Of course, right.
Right?
That's interesting.
So, I don't think anybody has the palate. I really, truly don't think anybody has the palate to truly be able to taste some of these old and rare wines outside of a family who produced them, who has grown up. I think that Aubert de Bellay and those people at Romane Conti who've been around that wine for so long, they would know what a very old Romane Conti tasted like. But most other people don't have that experience. So that opens up a door for counterfeiters. And that is why most counterfeiters today are not making old and rare wine, because they don't want to have to get period glass. They don't want to have to get, the forensic stuff that we look at is, what is the chemical composition of the paper? What is the chemical composition of the glue? How was the ink applied? Is the ink the correct chemical composition for age? What is the capsule? Has the capsule and the bottle, have the capsule and the label or the labels aged together? Right? Because a lot of times they'll age the labels and then put them on. Well, they'll be disparate between the pieces. So it's like seeing a 65-year-old woman with a 25-year-old face. You know that there's been some work done, right?
There's a few of those around, yeah. That's fascinating because, lead capsules from the day. Certainly cork was better off years and years ago than it is today.
Well, and you got to get the right glass. So it's easier to mass produce the newer bottles.
Well, what kind of things would prisoner? I mean, that kind of thing?
Well, so a lot of the big counterfeits, like in Asia, are they're entry level. But a woman was just arrested in the UK for selling counterfeit yellowtail. The UK is awash in yellowtail. Yeah.
Why? It's $3.49 or something. How do you make it?
A bunch of $1 bills, or you make a couple $100 bills.
I suppose, but look, you and I know the glass these days is $16 a case just for the glass, the carton. Then you got to fake the labels, and you get all that. You could, and the juice has got to be. It's got to be something. 50 cents a liter or something. You got to put something.
Yeah, but I mean, the people who are drinking this are drinking it at pubs, and they aren't really paying attention. Although I think it is amazing. I think in some cases, those are, if you are a regular consumer of an entry level wine, I think that you would probably be able to notice the difference more than somebody drinking a 1945 Mouton for the first time. Because you have a set of expectations.
I would agree with that. But if you're, let's just take Yellowtail for a second, even Prisoner, which, I have a hard time drinking it. If you throw a bunch of stuff in a bottle, most people aren't going to know. They just say, hey, I'm drinking Prisoner. This is great. But let's take Yellowtail. I mean, the Wink wines and the naked wines are 60 cents a liter. That's, $3.60 or $4.50 a case. You're not going to buy much cheaper than that to get it into the bottle. The fake Yellowtail, I think most people are not going to do Yellowtail Chardonnay and something from the middle of Spain. I don't.
100%. But these people aren't focused on what they're drinking. They're focused on being at a pub, or whatever it is that they're doing. So I think at the end, I think that the people who did this, it was a combination of organized crime from China and Eastern Europe. And they made the bottles and brought them to the UK and just sold the crap out of them. I was in London. I judge at the International Wine Challenge. And I went into one of those little mini, there are a couple large grocery chains. Mm-hmm. And I went into one of their little stores by a tube stop, and I bought a bottle of Hendrick's. And I took it back and I put it in the freezer and it froze.
What?
Yeah.
Bottle of Hendrick's in the UK. Well, it's Scottish. But wow.
Yeah.
It's really crazy.
I know.
A fake bottle of Hendrick's.
Yeah.
That's why I drink Gordon's. So my dad.
So, I mean, it happens. And it's, and I think that you've got, so this woman apparently was buying, somebody showed up with a van full of Yellowtail and said, hey, I've got this extra. Do you want to buy it, super price for you? And she bought it. But these people are, they go around to these little stores and they say, oh, so-and-so store committed to 50 cases and they only bought 20. I've got 30 extra cases. Do you want them?
A good story.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Heard it all the time. So how does it, well, we're going to talk about this. This is fascinating stuff. But, we got the 3-tier system in America, right? You have to go from the supplier, whether it's the importer or the winery, to if you use a distributor like Young's or RNDC or Southern or the big guys. Is there fraud not from them because even has like an internal ABC rep who's there all the time, but is there fraud to them?
100%.
Wow.
So I've gotten bottles of, for example, Vogue that allegedly came directly from Dreyfus Ashby to a reputable vendor and then to my client. And so what happens, because wine has gotten so expensive, things happen in transport. There is a very, very fine Bordeaux wine, and they realized that somebody on their own bottling line was swapping out authentic bottles for counterfeits and putting the counterfeits in the OWCs.
Wow.
So people across the value chain, realize this, and so here's, I think this is fascinating. So there was a a ship carrying Domaine de la Romane Conti, and it stopped in Honfleur in France. And this wine was stolen from the port. The police got it back. It went to Canada. The importer in Canada immediately turned around and sold his allocation to brokers in New York City, who sold the wine to an executive at Goldman Sachs, who put it in his house at the Hamptons. And then that guy's cellar manager, when he was away, stole the wine. And that cellar manager ended up jumping off the Essex house the day that he was supposed to get arraigned or sentenced.
Oh, wait, yeah. That was
it was in the news. But so that wine got stolen in transport, and then it went to a sole importer in Canada who turned around and gray marketed it to the United States. So that's supposed to be a good supply chain. But DRC can't control the bottles once they leave. DRC. This is why we have to control the supply chain to control fraud. Because a lot of times what happens is, truck drivers are beginning to pay attention to how much the wines are worth. You just take a couple cases off the top of the pallet, and you've got a down payment for a house.
Sure. But that whole truck of Pappy that was stolen how many years ago?
Right.
But there's that big theft.
It does. And I'll tell you, with this Shea-Vault solution, I have talked to some of these big wholesalers and distributors, and they're very interested in it because they want that oversight. Because they want to, the interesting thing about this is that at the bottle level, you can't swap it out. So one of the other things that happens a lot is people put their wine in storage, right? And you've got a bottle of 82 Petrus in storage. Guy who owns the storage facility needs some money. He goes and sells your 82 Petrus. And when somebody else comes in with an 82 Petrus, he replaces your bottle. And sometimes, like in Francis Dinkelspell's book, the Ponzi scheme ends up running out.
Yeah, right.
But this solution protects the individual bottle, because you can't swap my bottle. That's my bottle of Lafite. It's not a bottle of Lafite anymore. It's my bottle of Lafite. And the producer can see where it is, and the end consumer can see where it's been, and the wholesaler can track where it goes. And, there's going to be some issues. There's going to be some gray market, but the gray market is really where a lot of that fraud gets into the 3-tier system. That was the other thing I told the National Conference of State Liquor Authorities. This 3-tier system, in my opinion, is a joke.
It is a joke.
It's a total joke. And it doesn't work because in the state of California, you can be an importer and a vendor. So there you go. 3-tier system broken, right? So...
Well, as I talk about, prohibition was never repealed. It was just broken up into 50 pieces and everybody can control, and it's a pain in the ass. I will say something interesting. We're going to be on an hour really soon here, and this is going to have to be a 2-parter. But I was just awarded, and it hasn't hit the press yet because it hasn't started yet, but it's contracted, the only direct-to-consumer vendor allowed to ship into Utah.
Oh.
They put out an RFP long story short, they put out an RFP in January, but I had been talking to them for years, and they've now authorized it, and now we're working on the process. And it's incredible opportunity. I think it's a incredible opportunity for.
So I broke my teeth in Utah. I half grew up in Park City. We had a home in Deer Valley from the time that it opened. So my parents bought in Deer Valley in 1983. Deer Valley opened in 1982. So I spent a lot of my youth there. When I graduated from college, I was living in Deer Valley. I worked at the Stein Erikson Lodge. It was my first job out of college.
Wow.
And then I wrote wine lists in Park City for a friend who had a couple different restaurants. And so I know Utah very well. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they had an incredible facility. I toured their 100,000 square foot completely robotic distribution center, which was like amazing.
Yeah.
And watched, Barton's Vodka go by me as well as Opus go by me.
Yeah.
So that's not really a reception.
Congratulations, them.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun thing. And the reason is there is no 3-tier. There is no nothing. You don't have to register the brands. You don't have to worry about Federal Express returning the package. You don't have to worry about signatures required. None of that occurs in Utah because it goes to the store and the consumer picks it up, and they can't return it. There's no alcohol return. So that's an amazing thing, even though they do take 88%, and I can privately go over the numbers with you, but they get 88% of what they do. You know, they get their Pappy allocation like I used to get mine, but you can, because it's only 88%, if you win the lottery and you win the right to buy Pappy, it's like, you know, like $100, not even $100. It's 88% at $69.
And my boyfriend and we've been together for over 10 years, but I was dating him actually in 96 when I moved to New York. He was a bartender in Park City for 20 plus years. And we were telling a friend the other day, we were telling Ronan, because we were in Napa together, that one of the great things about Utah is that at the end of when a new vintage comes in, they don't mark things up.
No.
So if you happen to be in the right place at the right time, you get screaming deals on first growths and burgundies that people don't know about. So it can be kind of a trick. Maybe we should be telling people that. So, but yeah.
I want to ask you a question about a recent theft. Then we'll have to wrap it up, and then we're going to come back. We're going to get heavy into the blockchain concept when we do this again, and we can do it next week or the week after, whenever you want. Perfect. There was a huge theft in fact, I was in Hermosa Beach, where I hang out all the time. I was talking to the liquor store owner there, and she's got an interesting collection of wines. And she said, "Did you hear about the theft in Venice?"
Yes.
And it was just written up again. I guess this morning my daughter sent me an article to the video of the guy looking in the camera. So I think the wholesale value, the retail value was $100,000 or $200,000 worth stolen. $700,000. Okay, so let's say, so for one, that person doesn't know what he's stolen because it could be fraudulent.
So let me tell you about it.
Go ahead.
So, because the next morning I got a phone call from these are the types of cases that I help law enforcement with, and there's also a private investigator working on this. So I know a little bit about this case. So, do you remember the French Laundry case?
Yes.
No, that was one of the 13 thefts in the Bay Area. So there is a ring of people who are doing this, and they did not get caught. These guys went through the ceiling, and they dropped down, and they have them on camera for 3 hours, FaceTiming with somebody, showing them all the bottles.
Come on.
Nope.
Wow.
So 3 hours they were in there, and as somebody was directing them bottle by bottle what to steal. Now, you know, again, they said, I said first thing, the guys got, get serial numbers, get in, because a lot of it was burgundy. I'm like, okay, well, Wilson Daniels will know what serial numbers you have, so get that information. They're like, we're going to send a list to the auction house. And I'm like, nope, the wine's already been sold. The wine was sold probably before the theft occurred. And it's through these brokers who have their rich clients, and they send a list and they say, hey, this is what we've got. And then, the wine gets sold. It's never online.
No, of course.
It's never publicized. No. And this, again, my blockchain solution will stop that.
So,
I won't stop it all, but we'll be able to recover those balls.
And that's interesting but let's just say that these guys are stealing because the 3-tier system's broken. And I've had many, many people over the years bring me things that I fortunately couldn't use at the time that I would love to know what the provenance was.
Right.
These guys could have stolen some fake DRC as well, though, right?
Sure. But the guy...
This is a wine shop, only a wine shop?
Yeah.
Distill spirits?
I don't know if he sold spirits, but I know that he did have a lot of direct allocations.
Oh,
I mean, he had the store for like 20 years. So if he had counterfeits, then he bought them on the gray market and he was duped. But this is exactly how the 3-tier system is broken, because those guys can so easily flip those wines. There is no control. It's absolutely ridiculous. And in this country, all the money goes to the lobbyists who care about not shipping to different states. They don't care about the actual crime, and they need to open up their eyes because they're losing massive amounts of money. The governments are losing huge amounts of money in unpaid taxes. Like, we both live in California. Stop raising my taxes. Go after the crooks.
Right.
But yeah, that theft was amazing. I mean, they burrowed through the ceiling.
Well, I don't understand it because my father, before he was in the wine business in the 70s, he had a chain of pharmacies, and that was the first thing you protected because they were stealing narcotics all the time. And he learned early on in 1959 or something that you got to protect the ceiling because it happened all the time.
Yeah.
I find that amazing. But,
and that's how they went into a lot of the restaurants and the break-ins that went here too. The other thing that they had in common, all of these break-ins happened on the night before a holiday closure, so that there's going to be 24 hours before somebody's in the space.
Oh, that's interesting thought, because the only successful theft in Vegas, which was many years ago, was planned the day after the Super Bowl, because there were money that would have been in the vault at the sports book. But I had a conversation with an executive of R&DC, and it fascinates me to have these conversations because when you're talking about breaking down prohibition, and we in the industry, that it's at odds with the Commerce Clause, and we've been trying to get the Supreme Court to look at it, and they won't. And it is mainly because the WSWA, the Wholesalers Spirits Association of America, is very powerful, like the NRA is, and they're not going to let you break down. And let's face it, the mob was in wine and liquor for forever. I mean, maybe there still are in some cases, but for the most part, it's just leftover mob mentality that keeps us at bay this way, just because it's alcohol. But it was a very the interesting thing to me when I had this conversation. I wanted to have the listeners of the show hear from somebody inside one of the. It's a completely different outlook on what goes on in the marketplace. It is strictly driven by how much can I sell and when can I sell it. There's no romance of the industry. There's no romance of the alcohol. There's no romance of wine. There's none of that exists. It's out of the background. The question is, how much shelf space can I get and what can I sell it for? And what are they drinking? I could care less if they're drinking White Claw, which is, canned crap that the millennials think is great. And not worry about the fine wine division, because you know what? People are buying it right now, so it's not that important. It's a fascinating part of that industry. It's to them, it's a commodity. Yeah, that's
and that's what breaks my heart, and that's why I go back to the producer, and I want to find the solution that enables the producer to protect their brand, protect their legacy, protect the product, give them oversight, protect the end user, and connect the end user and the producer directly. So I'm excited to tell you about that, because it's really...
When we do part 2, and I'll make sure I stay focused on that, we can do it as soon as you'd like.
It's hard because it's such a fun topic.
We're just going to get into that because I want to hear about it, because I've always wondered about blockchain technology when it came to wine, where it has where it fits. And it sounds like you've got a keen understanding of how that's going to help the consumer, and the people that listen to the show are wine consumers. And I get trade people on the show that will listen to it, and I have consumers listen to it. And I think this is a fascinating subject. It's been such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. You too. I look forward to
Los Altos, which is sort of the southern part of the peninsula, right?
Yeah, I'm in Los Altos still. So, one of the things that's interesting is that my father, this is the original Silicon Valley. My father's one of the original designers of the integrated circuit.
Wow.
So it's kind of fun that, that he was an inventor and an entrepreneur, and I'm kind of fun. And I'm sitting in his office right now. So
would you fly to San Jose to get there?
Well, I live in Sausalito.
Oh, you do? Okay.
And we have a home in Sonoma. So, but my mom still lives here. So I kind of fly, I drive back and forth.
Well, I'll keep you posted the next time we're coming up. We usually fly to Oakland, but I'd be willing to fly into wherever to sit with you live with the microphones. I have a little portable studio I bring along.
Yeah, it's the most fun. We'll do it up there. Okay. I'll open up something yummy and real.
No, but now you got my interest in this. Like, what are these? Well, I've probably tasted many fake wine, not knowing that they were bottled improperly. But I tried to do business with reputable. Like, we were in French Laundry once for dinner, and I had a customer looking specifically for Burgundy for his cellar, and I wonder how many fake ones are his cellar, because he was one of those guys looking for a deal somewhere,
Oh yeah.
They brought. I told the guy my budget. I told him I wanted the Grand Cru or Premier Cru if I could do it. I wanted Côte de Nuit, and he brought this wine, and I rolled it over, and it was an importer in San Francisco, and I've trusted them ever since. They've here's the difference. I'll just wrap it up with this. I did a real estate transaction here, and it culminated and started and culminated on a glass of Grand Cru Burgundy. I forgot the region. And it told me when that happened that how important a good glass of wine is, how good, honest, and I think it's a great term now. I've been using it a lot. Honest glass of wine means two things now, right? It not only means that the winemaker was true to trying to put together the terroir of that wine based on what he or she was receiving, but now we're talking about your honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a crazy world.
Too complicated. Thanks again, Maureen, for the time.
Thank you. And I'll look forward to part 2. I'll bring some counterfeit bottles for you to look at.
That'd be so fun.
Yeah. Good. We'll do it again.
Cheers.
Thanks.